Sheila, and I'm here to talk to you about manners and why I think that the way that a lot of parents teach their children manners is actually counterproductive and can damage the child and impact upon the parent too. Many years ago, manners were defined as the sensitive awareness of the feelings of other people. And for me, the whole problem with the way that so many parents teach their children manners in our society is that they are being totally insensitive to the feelings of their children. And I've really thought about the way that this impacts on children, and I think it impacts in several ways, basically. Whenever you speak to a young child, or any child really, and ask them to do something differently to what they're already doing, so for instance, if you give a child a sweet or a little toy or something and you say, "What do you say?" you're prompting them to say something that they weren't already planning to say. And the message that that child is getting, not necessarily one that you want to send them, but nonetheless they're receiving the message that you want them to be different to what they are. And I think when children hear that their parents want them to be different to what they are on a regular basis, several times a day, sometimes several times an hour in the cases of saying please and thank you, they're going to pick up the fact that you're not satisfied with them. You want them to be different, you want them to behave different, and you're not satisfied with them as they are. And that is a terrible thing for children to hear, in my opinion. Not only is it terrible from the point of view of their, developing self-esteem and feeling able to feel good about themselves, but it's also terrible because you're role modelling someone who is finding fault with things. You're role modelling someone who is dissatisfied. And I think children innately follow their role models. Their parents are the people who show them how to survive in this world. They want to behave like their parents do because that's the people who have been there and done it. So if your parents are finding dissatisfaction, if your parents are telling people to behave differently, if your parents are making judgments about other people's behaviour, then you're going to do the same. And it's not very long at all before children are starting to complain back themselves not about their parents' manners, obviously, but about what they're eating, what friends they've got around, what they want to watch on telly. And their parents have shown them how to get what they want. They get what they want by being demanding and rude, because that is the other aspect of so many parents when they say to their children, say please, say thank you. They're not asking them to please say please or thank you for saying thank you. They're issuing demands and instructions. And of course, again, the children will pick up on this and do the same. I was at a party a few weeks ago when there was this young lad, not yet 2 years old, and he was another lady at the party who bought him a present, which was this big bouncy ball, second-hand bouncy ball. And she went to get it out of her car and gave it to the little lad, and he was absolutely thrilled with this ball, and he was bouncing it around, and he had this beautiful grin, and every couple of seconds, or half a minute or so, he'd glance towards this lady who bought him this ball and give her the most wonderful smile. Anyway, after about 5 minutes of him playing with his ball, his mum said to him in a very loving way, "Are you going to say thank you for the ball?" And it was really, really interesting for me the way his face changed. It changed from one of this beatific joy to his face collapsed in on itself, and it was filled with doubt and self-consciousness. And he very obediently said thank you for the ball and gave the woman a kiss on her cheek as he was instructed to. But from that moment, his enthusiasm for playing with the ball was really lost, and I felt that the poor child was wondering if he'd kind of entered into some kind of contract that he didn't realise he was entering into when he accepted that ball off that woman. And he was virtually pre-verbal, and it was the only words, thank you was the only words I heard him say in the hour that I was in his company. And this is not an isolated instance of an overbearing mother. This was a loving mother, and this is normal behaviour. Another lady I know, after I was talking to her about manners, at first when I was talking to her about manners, she said to me that she thought that I was over the top, and it was perfectly reasonable to teach children to say please and thank you. But then afterwards she came back to me and said that she'd had a lady round for lunch that she didn't know very well, and they both had young children about 5 years old. And in the case of a lunchtime hour and a half or so, she was aware that they both prompted their children to say please or thank you on at least 10 occasions. And she was saying that having listened to what I said about manners, she realised that the reason she was prompting her daughter was because she didn't want the other mother to think badly of her. And I think that this is one of the things that's really, really challenging about choosing not to teach our children manners. The challenge is what other people are going to think of us if we don't. Certainly with my sons, I chose not to teach them manners. And if we went into a shop and stuff, I mean, when they were very young it was okay, but as they got older it was really, really noticeable that if they didn't say thank you for something that they bought in a shop or something, the shopkeepers would look at me aghast, not only because my sons hadn't said thank you, but because I had clearly failed in my duty because I hadn't prompted them to. And so you're being judged on a double level for having rude children and being rubbish yourself, and that is very challenging. But I did try pretty hard to stick to my guns. I have to admit, by the time they got to 6 or so, the pressure of other people's expectations would be enough sometimes for me to hiss, say thank you. But on the whole I held out, and by the time my sons were about 8 or 9, they were saying please and thank you of their own accord, and it was a great relief. But more importantly, they had kept something intact that I believe an awful lot of children lose. And I think what they had kept intact was a sense of really high self-esteem and fondness for themselves, an unself-conscious delight in the world. I think one of the things that really troubles me about the whole say please, say thank you issue is that you're creating a verbal hurdle that your children have to jump through. And when you create that verbal hurdle, it's instead of any expressions of joy or pleasure that they might come up with themselves. I mean, I remember a little girl was here with me the other day, and I gave her something, and because she hasn't been well bred and well brought up, she gave me a high five because I'd given her this CD, and that to me was absolutely wonderful. I would far rather a cheeky grin or just a smile than some wooden thank you very much. Because I think the other thing about manners is that I know many children who've been really well trained in the art of please and thank you and if you wouldn't mind awfully and eating with their mouth shut, but in fact they are very surly and ungracious children with very little awareness, as this 17th century definition of manners is, very little sensitive awareness of the feelings of other people. They're just woodenly going through the ropes, and they feel pissed off about it. That's the impression they give me. So you can have a child say thank you to you, and there's no sincerity behind that at all. And the other thing that's crazy about it is you can have a child say thank you to you. I remember this one instance. We had this lad coming to visit us, and he was about 10, and he was pretty miserable and surly in my opinion. He didn't have much joy of life in him. He'd been very well trained, and anyway, his mother was sitting at the kitchen table with me while his father was across the room with my husband. And when my husband gave the lad something, the mother, who was clearly had a radar scanning for whatever this lad was going to say at all times, immediately piped up, "Say thank you." And the father said, "It's all right, he already has." And it was like some, oh, right, okay, military stand down, it's okay, a crisis of non-manners has been averted, and it was just like, oh God, the pressure and the emphasis, and it's just, you feel as though, and whose benefit were they doing that for? And you feel as though the emphasis and the desire to get children to be polite takes precedence over every other aspect of interaction with children, and you are missing so much when you become that obsessed by something. And I think that is what is going on in our culture, that we are becoming obsessed by training our children in a particular way. But when, and I go into town and I see parents whose children are not verbal, and they're in buggies and they're offering them sweets or something, but they're saying, "What do you say?" And to me, this is no different to training a parrot to talk or a puppy to stand on its hind legs. It's meaningless. Those children aren't being taught the meaning of please and thank you. That they're just being told that it's a magic word, literally a magic word, some kind of Masonic handshake that allows you to have things, which is so far from the genuine meaning of what good manners are. And I feel a sense of despair that these children are being treated in this way, treated in such a rude and abominable way, really, because parents want them to be polite. It seems the height of craziness to me. And I think the other thing about it, as well as giving children feelings of low self-esteem, making them feel that their parents want them to be different and then that they're not good enough as they are, you also create this real sense of self-consciousness. Children become really self-conscious because their parents have drilled them into worrying about what other people think of them. And hand in hand with this self-consciousness is this feeling that being a child is a bit embarrassing, really, and it is so much better to be an adult. And I think that especially in our society, when part of good manners to me is about making sure children know what their place in the world is. If children are in school, they have to stand up when the teacher comes in. You never get parents or adults standing up when a child comes into a room. Children are expected to sit on the uncomfortable chairs or in the back of the car. And, if adults are having a conversation, children are expected to bow out or shut up or, at the very least, not be a nuisance. Again, I think that, many, many years ago, that kind of precedence, adults taking precedence over children, would have been quite reasonable and valid. If we were living in Stone Age tribes and adult conversation was about the next hunt or getting the crops in, then fair enough that children would take a back seat in that situation. But so much adult conversation nowadays is about what the weather's like or what the bargains down the shop are, and a very, very little genuine value and consequence. So there's no reason at all for children not to be able to join in. And if children are a bit boring sometimes, then so what? So are adults, and there's this, you never ask adults to run along and play if they're boring you, but you certainly do children. So you develop this, you impart with children this self-consciousness and also this dissatisfaction, not just with their lives and things in general, but with being a child. You hurry children through childhood because the way you behave towards them makes them think that being an adult is better. Being an adult is more important, and there's more prestige attached to being an adult. So what you end up with, what a lot of parents end up with, is pseudo-adults, 10-year-old pseudo-adults, and they become poacher turned gamekeeper. And so from a situation of, throughout their younger years, you're drilling them on the social niceties, and by the time I got to 10, it's them drilling you. We had friends around the other day, and we were playing a board game, and the mother was talking in what her young daughter considered to be too loud a voice. And about 3 times she ticked her mother off and told her to keep her voice down, which I think is absolutely hilarious, really. But what a painful situation to be in if you've got that sort of relationship with your children where you're just constantly looking out for things to correct them on. And so, for so many reasons, I think that teaching children good manners is an absolute disaster. And I think that we should think very carefully about the way that we talk to our children, the way we deal with our children. And if we want to say anything to correct our children or make them behave differently, we have to be really conscious of the fact that every time you tell your children to behave differently to what they're behaving, you're telling them that you're not satisfied with them, that they are not good enough. And I think that is the bottom line for me. Thank you.